The Design Board is a proud member of the Surround Podcast Network from Sandow Design Group. The Surround Podcast Network is home to the architecture and design industry's most notable shows. Check it out at surroundpodcast.com.
Welcome, everyone. We are excited to kick off an episode of The Design Board today. The Design Board is a podcast by Upspring that focuses on design, development, and everything in between. We host innovators in our industry and explore topics that support your growth in every way. Today, I'm joined by Jared Bradley. Hey, Jared.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. Jared is the founder of the Bradley Projects, Certified Construction Services, and the Bradley Development Group. He has devoted his architectural career to advancing the profession of architecture by positioning the architect in the center of leadership in the combined fields of development, architecture, and construction. He has championed the importance both in practice and the built environment, all while creating boundary-pushing concepts that remind others that architecture is art in a permanent built form for living and working. Jared, I'm so glad you're able to join me today. Thanks for having this conversation.
Thanks, Caroline.
Today, Jared and I are going to chat about how architecture can directly impact the human experience. So, Jared, let's start with the basics to give our listeners a little background into your professional experience. Can you tell us a little bit about your role as the architect, developer, and general contractor?
So, yeah, I think it's an ever kind of evolving process. And I think that the role itself is always changing and it's interrelated. And, you know, what's great about kind of the way we do our work is that there's never any finger pointing. And I think in the industry, what I think architects are fearful of has always been getting blamed for something by the contractor or the owner. And what the contractor is fearful of is, you know, losing margin in the construction budget and getting fingers pointed at mistakes. And what the developer's always worried about is failure or liability. And so everyone's always pointing fingers at each other. But as the role itself and kind of the way that we work is, and from a business sort of leadership perspective, the three roles that we play, like I think in the industry are seen as completely separate roles, but they're really not. We're all on the same side of the table, and we're all like, our whole purpose is the success of the project, which is on the other side of the table. When you bring everybody under one umbrella, I mean, it was maddening at first, of course, but now what you're seeing is what I'm seeing is our architects just like really hanging out with the contractor guys and the contractor guys really talking to the finance guys, and everybody sort of has input as we evolve processes, the projects. And what's amazing is when I see like the construction guys wearing the architecture guys shirts and the you know, the architecture guys are wearing this, you know, like our company's construction team shirts, and it's kind of fun.
I love that. Okay, great. That gives our listeners just a better understanding of how those layer onto one another. You mentioned how the role of the architect has changed. Can you walk us through that a little bit? How has that role evolved over time?
So for me, like, you know, I think about this the past 25 years that I've been in this industry, and of course you can think back even earlier than that, and all the way back to like ancient Greece and even earlier. I mean, the comparisons are almost comical the further you go back to where it is now. Our industry has sort of gotten as watered down and as empty as some of our built environments in our country. I mean, the United States, almost every city has got this entire flavor of mediocrity kind of going through them. And I think that it correlates a lot with the evolution of the architect and the architect's place in every project. And I feel strongly that in my career, in the past 25 years, I've seen the architect fall even further down in terms of crucialness to a project, at least from the project leadership side, to the point where the developer has really pushed the architect into like a very simple line item that's obligatory in their pro forma. And so when you do that and you take the architect out of that position of making place for people and actually caring about the built environment, it's no wonder what we're seeing and what people are complaining about, mostly about this could be anywhere USA is getting worse and worse because we keep suppressing the architect's talents. And at the same time, the architects, I mean, they're equally guilty. They've allowed it to happen as well. I think as a profession, we've been very complacent as leaders in our communities. And the majority, I think, of the developers have really sort of helped play that out even more. And so, look, I fully understand the roles that everyone plays because we play all the roles. So I'm not saying one role is better than the other. But what I am saying is that each role needs to be right sized. And I think the role of the developer has become way too huge. And everybody wants to be a developer. the bar of entry to be a developer, anybody on this podcast right here could wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to be a developer. And the bar is so low, you just do that. You just say, I'm a developer one day. So when you put all that into place, the people that are really making some of the bigger decisions are usually the people that don't have the skill sets to do that. My big push has not been to put the architect on some sort of pedestal. I think that the architect should take a lot more leadership, like what happened back in Frank Lloyd Wright's days and even earlier when they were considered the clerks of the work, which meant there was a bank, there was a commissioning client, and there was the architect. The architect was intimately involved with the contractor. The architect was intimately involved with the details on the site. The architect was intimately involved with running the budgets, balancing the budgets, making big decisions. I think post 50s, 60s, we started cranking out all these CEOs and all these MBA degrees from all these business schools. And all of a sudden, real estate became actually a big time commodity. And then as you see that progress, you actually start seeing the architect taking less and less and less of a role. So again, I'm not suggesting that the position of architect should be like the top guy of any sort of pyramid. What I'm suggesting is that it's a flattened line that everyone serves on, and that the architect leads the discussions about how to create space for people, how to create our built environment, and how to create architecture as art again. Because again, no one thinks of it that way anymore. It's quite frustrating.
Yeah, I think that's great. I was just going to ask too that you often refer to architecture as art, and it sounds like that's how this perspective was formed, right? That's
right. Yeah. I mean, it's, I think that perspective, you and I have talked about this a lot, Caroline, and I used to teach the Graduate School of Architecture in San Diego at the New School. And it was one of those things that I used to always kind of insist on, that you have to be dreaming the entire time, right? I get that part of it, but you also have to have some grounding to that. You can't stay in the clouds all the time. But a colleague, professor that I worked with, Alan Rosenblum, would always say to the students that you have to have one foot in the sky and 1 foot on the ground.
I love that.
And that's just one of those things that is stuck with us, because that's actually, ironically, from coming from academia to this, that's actually the fundamental principle of what we do. We have to have 1 foot in the sky and 1 foot on the ground. Otherwise, the foot in the sky, you get both in the, well, you can imagine what would happen. So, but I think the other thing about it is that when we're all in architecture school, I think as designers, we come out of architecture school, we are full of creativity. We are full of passion. We are full of lighting the world on fire. And then what actually happens is we get dropped into the world where we get our teeth kicked in over and over again. And then we go through a process of de-creativity. We're taking creativity out of us because we're told by the world standards that we have to conform. And all of a sudden I see architect after architect after architect coming out of school disenchanted and like depressed and hating their job. And the reason for that is because it's such a juxtaposition leaving architecture school. And so when I think about architecture as art, I did the same thing. I got out of architecture school. I immediately was told, you can't do this, you can't do that. That's not how it works. You need to sit over there and do what we tell you to do. And I've got to tell you, my whole life I've been a little more edgy. I mean, I'm an avid skateboarder. I'm punk rock at heart. I love punk rock music, and I love sticking it to the man. And, when you put me in the corner, and I'm only going to last a few years before I say, this is not the way I'm going to live my life. So that's how it started for me. But I'm going to tell you that art and architecture as art, it really came to me in architecture school. It left me for about 18 years. I met a guy in Nashville when we relocated to Nashville who's a developer, and he's so much like Larry David, a great friend of mine. He's Scott Chambers. He is so passionate about architecture, and he's not an architect. He's a developer, and he gets so frustrated. And just like Larry David, he will just go off on like, what is this? I don't understand this. Why is this way? And he goes, don't these guys understand architecture is art? And it was that one day he said that, it just clicked everything back into focus. Like, what am I doing? Like where I'm going is going this direction by building this vertically integrated practice. But the foundation of it is serving others, and architecture is art. And that's where that whole cycle has sort of come and gone,
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think even within the past 2 years, we've seen such a movement towards people really wanting to understand how architecture and design is really impacting the built environment. So I'd love to hear from your perspective too, what that looks like. How does architecture impact the human experience?
Without being, overly dramatic, well, actually, to be overly dramatic, I guess.
I'll take it.
Yeah. I think there are like really two primary things that really impact the human experience. And I think one is how you see yourself in this world. And the other is the space that you encompass like every day and every moment. I think the first one is really all about spirituality. But I think the second one is all about consciousness. And, I could pontificate on both for days, but I do think that the second one, and as it relates to architecture, it's a personal sort of unique thing that about how your body takes up space and the space that you're in. And I think it's different for everyone, but at the same time, there's a lot of commonalities because we're all human beings. And so we all share a lot of feelings about this. Again, I go back to graduate school when I was teaching there, and we had from the University of California, San Diego, UCSD, we had a neurologist come in, a professor, and lead us through this whole process of what's called eurythmy, which is like kind of like how we move. And it was so bizarre, but it was almost like really like hippie yoga, but like insanely weird. And at that time I was thinking, well, only in Southern California am I going to get some of this. But as you go through that, the whole class, I mean, instructors, all of us kind of cleared out a room and we all closed our eyes. And this neurologist kind of led us through this guided process of getting in tune with our bodies and what it means to be in your body. And it got so deep, and we were moving around the room in these weird movements and motions. And then we would lay down, and then he would just guide us through like breathing and thinking through where the center point of our body is and all of a sudden I just got lost in this stuff. And it was like, this human experience it got like deep into our souls about like who we are. It was so bizarre. And I don't want to get too far off on a tangent, but I will say what that taught me was that understanding how our body sort of takes up space and the space that we're in is all about architecture. Every single moment of everybody's life, we are dealing with architecture. The problem is that we have so much bad architecture that doesn't even address the human body. I mean, every space I go into every single day is a box. Almost every single one.
Yeah.
You're probably in a box right now. I'm actually in a box, and I don't understand where the box became the standard. And it became the standard because it's the easiest thing to probably build. But at the same time, like, what do we do as architects? We need to lean in to understanding what the human experience is. And if you don't understand your own experience and what it means to yourself as an architect, you're not going to be able to help others with that. And I think we have a responsibility at least in my company as a developer, to keep pushing this and figuring out how we can change sort of the paradigm of the livability issues that we all deal with since probably the early 1800s. I mean, even before that, when we started building boxes. And I don't know, I could go on and on about living in a box, but I do think that architecture is really one of the only things that can affect the human experience like immediately right now, besides spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, outside of the human experience, taking it one step further about how architecture can impact communities at large, especially creating a sense of place for people. Do you have insight into what that looks like too when you're helping create these communities?
Yeah, a word that's been resonating with me for quite some time now is just the word awareness. Mm-hmm. And I think coming out of the pandemic, and people are like, oh, how's COVID-19 going to change the industry? And what? And I'm like, at first I was like, oh, okay, well, I got to have some good answers for this. And the truth is, we don't know until you live past it a little bit. And as we've lived past it, I've realized that this word awareness keeps coming up to me and my team, because it's all about context, but that context is all about listening. And that listening is at the community level. I'm talking about neighbors in the neighborhood where you're doing work, leaders in that neighborhood, the people, the mom and pops who've had stores there forever, like really talking to them and listening to them about what their fears are, what they're fearful of losing, the neighborhood character, all of these things, like for me personally, coming out of the pandemic, which I know you didn't ask a pandemic question, but everyone asks me the pandemic question at least once in every interview. So I thought I'd get right to it. Yeah, throw it in there. But this awareness is about it just engaging and responding to people and serving people. Mm-hmm. And so every project we do, we have to ask the right questions as architects, developers, and builders. What's the right thing to do here? What belongs here? What needs to be here? What would help impact this community in a way that nothing else can do? And it's different every time. And so making a place for communities is at the core of who we are that's who we are as architects. We just forget it. Our industry has literally stripped that concern out of us and has filled it with economic gain, yield, metrics, all the buzzwords that are all about the bottom line. And what I tell people all the time is that if you put all that aside, because you're not going to do a project that is negative, you're not going to do a project that is not going to be successful. But if you put it aside for a second, I can promise you that if everyone shifts their focus back to providing a sense of community for people, that you don't have to worry about money because it will be there and people will engage with the architecture, the building, the quote, the revenue side of every project. It will be there because you're not trying so hard. You're not trying so hard to make the money. You're just making great places for people. So that's kind of how we think about making place, in communities.
Yeah, I love that. That starts to touch on one of my next questions too, about how architecture and design can fuel greater social culture and economic good for these communities.
Again, I kind of go back to saying that's our entire purpose as architects. It should be our entire purpose. And I always ask people about our projects and as what we're doing as developers, like what is our higher purpose? Because if you can answer that and it's not about money and it's not about returns, because if you can answer it truly about what it's about, then you've got a project. If you can only answer it about finances, you don't have a project, you have a commodity. And what I'm seeing and what I'm really tired of is that every developer I know, I just can't even hang out with other developers. It irritates me to my core. I also can't hang out with other architects because all I hear is the same broken record about being sort of suppressed. And I can't hang out with other general contractors because I could write a book on that. Like being a general contractor in a general contractor's world, I mean, we just are not like any other general contractor because of where our heart comes from. I can't even hang out with those people because everyone's still focused on the same thing: liability, covering your tail, and making money. And it's like, that is not what we're about. And that's not what this world should be about. And so our economic good comes back to, number one, every project we do, how do we serve the people that are going to be using or dealing with this project? How do we serve them first? Number two, once we get past that question, how do we take our skill sets and the blessings that we've been given in our lives and share that with nonprofits or pro bono projects or giving back? I never realized how much giving back in the community and my free time and with our resources has projected my awareness of the community and making our work better. It's not about getting anything back. It's about just waking up one day and dealing in someone else's mess for a little bit and realizing, oh, wow, there's a problem here that needs to be solved. Yeah. And by doing that, you realize, wait, that's going on over here too, and over here. And again, I go back to that word awareness and leading with your heart. Those are two things that are just really critical to us.
I think that's great, especially the aspect of giving back to the community. If you're to look at architecture as art and that philosophy, and really changing the narrative too for maybe some of these architects or developers and contractors, what are some strategies or steps to put in place for people to just view things a little bit differently?
Two things. I think they need to start at a personal level. They need to start asking themselves, what's their higher purpose? Because I guarantee you everyone has one. They just don't stop and think about it. Mm-hmm. Because if you wake up every day, you have to get to work. You have to do this. You have that. Everyone has a list a mile long. And everyone's trying to check things off the box. But if you stop for a second and ask what your higher purpose is, and it can be anything from if you're one of our guys in the field that are digging a trench, or if you're one of our architects sitting upstairs, designing a building, just do what you do great and go past that. Like, how is what I'm doing helping someone else? So that's sort of like the first thing I sort of think about when I try to think about how to kind of correct some of this. But the other thing I would say is that getting involved with problem areas. I think we get so caught up in self and like what we need to do that if we look around, if everyone looked around and helped 3 people in their little circle of influence, what a difference that would make. And so, and stop worrying about money all the time. Like I know it's easy to say, hard to do, but really you've got to take moments in the day to stop worrying about that.
Yeah, I like that. Infusing the passion back into everything, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And then what about the end user? What are they really looking for? We're talking a lot about the human experience and how you feel in a space and what that looks like. Is there anything that you could call out that really impacts the way that person feels?
We were just having this conversation earlier about how, and it kind of went back to a COVID-19 question, post-pandemic, new world, new normals, whatever. And what's interesting about it is that I think people are looking for something that they don't know that they're looking for. And what I mean by that is I feel like they're looking for comfort and, feeling like they're part of something bigger and feeling like they're connecting to other people. I often look at younger demographic, I'll just say, with their phones in their face, doing Instagram shots in these beautiful little and, it's funny too, because if you zoom out, like it's probably just like one little thing they're capturing behind them. But what I get frustrated by that because I think it's so vain in some ways, but then I realize what everyone's doing is they're trying to connect and they're trying to capture moments in history of their lives so that they can just enjoy life. And they're doing it through the phone and through Instagram and other things now. But what that tells me is that there's a cultural shift happening. And I think it's interesting. The same people doing that also don't want to work anymore because I think post-pandemic, everyone's focused on life and how to live it. And everyone gets so like, I just want the good stuff now. And I think that, again, I get frustrated by some of that, but then I realize what's interesting about all that is that everyone's looking for the same thing. I think everyone's looking for comfort, for places to relax and places to connect with other people and build community and build culture or be a part of culture. And so in what we're doing as designers and architects and builders and developers on our side, it's kind of fascinating because we don't have to change anything we've been doing because from the beginning, it's all been about context and creating place for humans and creating human scaled places and spaces and really making things light and airy and natural light and views to outdoors and views to parts of the city and then walkability. And then we'd get into things about negative spaces in the building where people can stop and hang out for a few minutes and catch up before they go to another part of the building. And so we try to infuse this whole narrative of human space throughout our buildings. And so I don't think it's any one thing in specific. In fact, I would say people who go through our buildings probably prefer to be in our buildings, but they could never put their finger on why.
On what the specific thing is. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Well, it sounds like this whole community aspect is important, especially as we're creating these spaces that people want to be in. So do you have best practices or strategies for designing projects that bridge different neighborhoods or different types of buildings or even different types of architectural styles?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it goes back to context. And what I mean by that, I think I should elaborate a little bit on context because that's an easy word to throw out there. It can even be a buzzword sometimes. But you have to look at where you are in a particular city or a particular community. And then you have to listen to what's happening in that community. And then you have to respond to that one way or the other. And we respond to that by communicating as architecture with buildings and spaces. And that actually serves the community. So when you play it all out, there's this heart of a servant that's going into it. If we don't do that, again, I've already mentioned this, if you don't do that, you're into the development world where it's all about commodities. And that's what we're seeing happen throughout our cities is that developers coming into cities because they see an economic profitability sort of area. And so they drop their product, their commodity right there. And they can pick that up and drop it in Denver. They can drop it in Austin. They can drop it in Nashville, wherever. And so we're getting this monotony of just mediocrity. And so that kind of thing is the antithesis of what we do. We go into the community, we listen to the community, we listen to the site. And that context is really about everything from topography of that site, the geometry of that site, one thing that drives me nuts as architects, we always draw the property lines of what we're working on, and the rest of the sheet around it is white. And so that tells me right there, you're not thinking contextually, because there's buildings and there's streets and there's sidewalks and there's adjacencies to this. And you have to put all that on the paper to see how you're affecting that sort of fabric of the city. And so that's really what we've been, focusing on when I say context. It's that pragmatic, physical, technical thing that I just described. But it's also things that are intangible, like, again, views out to the city or views out to open space. It's what your neighbor's scale of their building is going to look like. It's what, the building behind you looks like. It's what the streetscape looks like. Are there street trees or are there not street trees? Can you park on the street or not? Like, all these things create that context that bridge not only this one neighborhood to other components within itself, but it also can bridge that character to other neighborhoods. Because it's leading with integrity and leading with intentionality. So if you're really intentional about those types of things, the architecture will start speaking its own language, and it will not be able to be picked up and put into another location. And that's really our guiding principles on every project, is how do we possibly make this very specific and very intentional, and how does this serve everyone in the community better?
I love that. I think this goes back to what you were saying. It starts with that awareness to create that intention. And then from there, you put everything into place. That's
right. Yeah.
I know we've talked a lot about the pandemic too. I think something else we've seen come out as a result of the pandemic is just a larger focus too on sustainability and resiliency in the built environment. So same thing. I'd love to hear your perspective on strategies and what that looks like, how that has changed for you as an architect, contractor, and developer.
Pandemic, COVID-19, and sustainability is always like the key questions we get asked. And it's kind of the same answer. I mean, for decades now, I sort of grew up in Southern California professionally. I grew up in Kentucky when I was younger, but I grew up in Southern California where, in the late 90s and onward, it was heightened awareness about sustainability. And that was just ingrained in me from architecture school all the way through. And so I've never really thought much about sustainability, because it's almost like, do I think about structure, or do I think about light? Do I think about doors and windows? I mean, I think I do, but a lot of that is sort of so intuitive that I don't stop and go, wait a second, let's check our sustainability boxes. So there's part of that I've always had a trouble talking about, because I just, like, what do you want to know about it? Is what people say. Of course, everywhere we turn, we're making sustainable choices. Where shall I start? But instead, what I realize though is that what people I think are getting at is, what are we doing beyond the norms? And I think where I go with this immediately is that when we make spaces for human beings, we should never have to talk about sustainability. It goes hand in hand. I've been watching, and I hate to admit this stuff on recording, but I've been watching this bush building contest show with my kids at night, where these guys go out in the bush and they build these like great structures, and it's a competition thing. And I just watch my kids and their response to this, and their wonder and their amazement at what these guys are doing in the middle of nowhere in like Utah somewhere. And I think we've lost all that wonder and amazement of just building for survival. Mm-hmm. And when you think, and that's pretty abstract from your question, I think. But what I think about when I watch those things is I try to think about how I can put that back into what we do as architects. And when I think about the exercise of survival building, that's the concept, the way we should be thinking about every project we approach. And it's not complicated, but we make it so complicated. And it's all about livability. It's all about how you feel when you're in one of those structures. And yeah, sure, it's about materials and it's about environmental sensitivities, but that's really goes into manufacturing. And so where are we sourcing our materials? So it's going to be hard for us to get away from a lot of basics, but making sure that we're choosing the basics that are the smartest and the most, sustainably harvested type of materials. But the big problem is we skip over the livability portion of this and we go right into like our lead points and did you use a reclaimed this or reclaimed, like, of course, everywhere we could, but let's talk about livability. And that's really an important thing about about sustainability that everyone kind of skip over. But again, we don't really ever have to change our approach much because that's at the core of everything that we do.
Yeah, I think like you're saying too, the livability aspect has become so important since the pandemic as people are more in tune with what they need out of a space, especially as we spent so much time at home originally, and some people still are spending time at home. So I think that perspective too, that it's every single component, it's ingrained into your process and those systems is really interesting. I'd love to end it on a piece of advice for young professionals entering the field. What would you tell them?
that's a wide open. I used to say don't do it, but I don't say that anymore. And what I mean by that is because the years of struggle have been real, and if you're not, and I hate to be old school about it, but I feel like if you're not putting years of struggle in, you're not growing, you're not pushing yourself. But I would really say just don't listen to everyone. Carve out your own path, blaze your own trail, type of thing, and obviously stick it to the man every now and then is good advice. But again, following your passion. And I also really am a big believer in outworking people. You have to outwork everyone always. I'm not saying work is everything, but when I see people now not wanting to work at all and go straight to the good life, it's just going to end poorly. It's going to end poorly for them. You have got to build a work ethic that will outwork everyone in your office when you first get out of school. Outwork everyone in your office. Stay late. Be the first one there. Those things are just basic business rules. That's not anything new, but we forget that. The younger generation definitely forgets that. And it just builds good habits. And when you start outworking everyone, you start outthinking everyone. And when you start outthinking everyone, you start doing things no one else is doing. And then you're, quote, using the buzzword of disrupting the market. And so instead of trying to follow the buzzwords, just outwork everyone. Start there. And then the other sort of advice I used to give grad students all the time was just, make the profession work for you. Do not work for this profession. Make the profession work for you, because if you get too focused on working for the profession, you'll get disenchanted so fast. We have got architects bit by bit have got to start taking some of this back.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. Well, I think this is such an important conversation too, especially if we're talking about the human experience and the impact we can have on the built environment. So thank you again.